Alright guys, I want to welcome you all back to some more of the House in Fata Morgana short stories. So I gotta say right now guys that I'm loving these little tidbits of storylines between each of these characters, whether they're canon or non-canon. I know I've said this before, but I just like gathering these little insights from them or what these stories have to offer. And of course guys, I want to thank you all for the love and support you all continue to show this series. It always means a lot to me, so I will always be thankful. So we're going to continue on from where we last left off, and we got two more stories to show. And with that, I hope you all continue to enjoy, and let's get to it. Alright everyone, we are now starting with Scarlet in the Coffeehouse. Now tell me, my boy, how are things going on your end? Asked Jacopo's good friend, chest puffed and hand stroking a triangular beard. He wasn't sure how he was supposed to react. Annoyed? Confused? Disappointed? Or as if he just stumbled upon a mythical creature? Can I take your silence as a poorly? Are we really going to do this? Jacopo finally managed to get out. But not without a heavy sigh, which created ripples in the 2 cups of coffee on the table between them. What are you even doing here? Maria. Yes, he was sitting across from his oldest friend and very much a woman. Scarlet in the coffeehouse. What does it look like? Having a cup of coffee, thank you very much. Maria tilted her head, still stroking the fake beard. She had lowered her voice a few registers, but Jacopo could still recognize it as hers without much difficulty. No, I mean, coffeehouses are men's establishments. What are you doing here? They were sitting in a far corner, away from most of the other customers. At the time, coffeehouses were social gathering places for men, where they talked news, gossip, business, or anything else of interest. And for an investor like Jacopo, it was a crucial part of how he did business. He had come here today to scout opportunities, but those plans fell by the wayside when he caught sight of a small-framed man with a slick-back blonde hair. So he approached her and confirmed his suspicions that it was Maria in men's clothing. Why else would I be dressed like this, doy? Please don't tell me you've weaseled your way into this place before. Weaseling isn't a very nice way to put it. But no need to get your panties in a bunch. This is the first time. Heck, half the reason I did it was to startle you because I thought you'd be here today. Jacopo had many questions. So many, in fact, he wasn't sure where to begin. Where had she gotten the clothes and the fake beard for one? Wouldn't the other maids get upset at her if they found out she was here? And why had she gone to such lengths just to surprise? Hold on. You said half the reason. What's the other half? 'Cause I wanted some coffee, doy. You have coffee at the mansion. I know we're not out of beans. That's not the point, stupid. Coffee at a coffee house is a completely different thing. It's about the experience. And speaking of, it kind of sucks. It's a real sausage party in here. That was more surprising to him than her being here. That she didn't like it here because there were only men. In his mind, and in society's eyes for that matter, that was simply what coffee houses were, and he'd never considered that as a potentially detrimental. Sorry. Assuming some other maid had said the same thing to him, Jacopo probably would have lectured her about the roles of men and women in modern society, and how it wasn't her place to judge men's spaces. But he considered Maria too much of a friend and an equal, and far enough detached from convention at that he couldn't bring himself to do that to her. He also had no idea how to effectively communicate that sentiment to her. Anyway, please don't go pulling stunts like this too often. I don't want to catch any blowback. It's fine. No one caught me. Well, I caught you, Jacopo thought. Not to mention the curious glances they'd been getting the entire time he was here. If he hadn't found her when he did, chances are she would have been thrown out by now. Oh, hey, Maria said, her eyes going wide. She then gave him a wink, not unusual for her, but it looked very out of place on a not quite there gentleman look she was sporting. Next time I want to go, you come with me. You're the big name investor Jacopino. No one's going to want to get on your bad side just 'cause you brought a chick. Excuse me? This is a place for doing business. Also, don't call me that. You can do all the business you want. I listen in on your talks, and when we get back, I give you my thoughts. You know, I'm sharp. I'm sure I could be of help. He wasn't sure if she was serious of just pulling his chain again, but since she wasn't laughing, he decided to assume the former. So you'd be a second pair of eyes then. You know, that's not a half bad idea, he said with a chuckle. Maria's eyes went wide. What? I've always counted on you, you know that. Right. You're making me blush. Having Maria as his right hand man would be the best for him in the long term. She was the only person he was able to really trust in this world, but it would take a lot of work to make that possible. He would need even more money, more power, and more status, enough to resist the pressure he would undoubtedly get from all sides. Jacopo was the heir of the Berzatti family, and Maria was the sole survivor of the Campanella family. There were still countless obstacles to putting her on the same stage as him. But in a week's time, I'll be taking the first step, he thought, tilting his head back toward the ceiling. That was when Jacopo's bride-to-be was scheduled to reach the new world. Hey, Jacopo, what is it? We'll always be like this, won't we? Maria asked, looking stern in a way he almost never saw her. But before he could answer, yeah, of course we will. We'll never change, she said, as if she needed some assurance. Oh, that one was pretty short, but I liked it. It was just to showcase their bond uh to this day. You know, like in any story, in any new incarnation, they're always going to be friends regardless, and I like that. I don't like in this particular story how in this part of the in the was it the second third door? I think this is the third door story. How she turned out. So I can appreciate their whole relationship. I just don't appreciate this part of this incarnation in the story because she has me confused at times. I'm thinking she's on his side, and then by the time he ends up meeting his fiance to be the white haired girl, she kind of messes with both of them. So I don't know, guys. I like it though. Scar in the Coffee House is another good one. All right, we're gonna move on to Lost. Master, I was wondering if I could ask some time off. One autumn afternoon, a young maid stood in Jacopo's study requesting a vacation, effectively signaling her intent to quit. He lit a cigar with practiced motions, took a deep breath, and then blew the smoke out in a long, slow stream. Again, he thought, making sure not to let it show in his face. What's your reason? He asked. Not satisfied with how you've been treated? I feel we've been quite generous. Oh no, not at all, she said. In fact, you have been much better to me than my previous house. I have no complaints about the treatment I have received. Then why? If I knew you would quit so soon, I never would have hired you in the first place. But you've just started showing some improvement. Now all that time and money's gone to waste. I'm sorry. I'm asking for a reason, not an apology, he said. His voice a mixture of exhausted, irritated, and scolding that only made the girl recoil further. He let out another heavy sigh. Are kids these days all this soft? Christ, he thought. Another complaint to add to the mound built up and locked inside. It's because, out with it. You know I don't like it when people aren't straight with me. The young maid looked up at her master apprehensively. His dark brown eyes seemed to peer straight through her soul, making her feel like she was being squeezed from the inside out. Other maids had told her he was a lot softer than he used to be, but she couldn't imagine that at all. He was a rich, unmarried, testy man in his 30s. Everything about him was terrifying. And despite that, she was willing to face up to him and beg to quit because there was something even worse in the mansion. The head maid scares me. Jacopo raised an eyebrow. He had been expecting her to say he scared her. Did the head maid do something to you? He asked. No, she didn't. Then why? Ash fell from Jacopo's cigar. His irritation levels were rising. The young maid looked up at him, fear in her eyes. Are you not scared of her too, master? Her appearance never changes at all. The past few years, there had been an increase in maids quitting for vague, non-specific reasons, and he finally had his answer. When Jacopo purchased the mansion, he was 22 years old, taking the first step to expanding his family's influence to the new world. Expectations for him were high, and the pressure was almost suffocating, but he was still an optimistic, ambitious young man at the time. He had to do this, and he had to do it right. And it was the determination that allowed him to maintain the softness in his heart beneath the tough businessman demeanor. Which was probably what led him to hiring the mysterious maid he found in his newly acquired estate. She was there when he first stepped through the door, calling him master and showing him around the property. Then once she was done, she started working. Jacopo wasn't sure what to make of the woman, but she seemed to know what she was doing, and over time his suspicion slowly transformed into respect. Where's your master? He asked. My previous master passed away, she said with a perfect smile. As the new owner of this mansion, you are my current master. Assuming that meant the previous owner had just made no arrangements for her to transfer anywhere after he passed, Jacopo decided to let her stay and work as she wished. It was the responsibility of those with power to give work to those without, and he felt some satisfaction in taking her in. And for more than 10 years, she did that work almost flawlessly. And as long as she wasn't causing trouble, he didn't see any reason to pry into personal matters. How long had she been here? Why she worked as a maid, or even who she was, he never bothered asking her anything. But now, he was 35, and the maid still looked to be in her early 20s, just as she had the day he arrived. Jacopo leaned back in his chair, staring absently up at the ceiling, watching the smoke from his cigar waft upwards. The young maid who quit was long gone, probably living with her family. He considered introducing her to a new house, but he had so many maids quit on him he was running out of acquaintances to foist them on. There was a knock on the door. He leaned forward and said, "Who is it?" "It is I," came the voice of the head maid. He called her in, and the woman who stepped through the door was indeed identical in appearance to 13 years prior. She floated gracefully to the center of the office, not making a single sound. He felt almost like he was watching a ghost. "One of the younger maids left today," she said, "so I wanted to discuss with you how we should proceed with distributing the work." "I leave that to you as always. I'll take care of finding a replacement." "Yes, master," she said with a bow. Usually that would be the end of discussion, and she would dismiss herself. But for some reason she stood there unmoving, her deep, unreadable eyes of jade locked on his. "What is it?" he asked with a frown mildly uncomfortable. "Have you considered dismissing me?" she said. Wearing the same faint smile she always had on, her face was like a perfectly carved mask. "I know that the maids have been quitting because of me. They've seen what I look like, and so rumors have been going around. The young girls are especially impressionable, so they are more likely to believe them." "Have you considered dismissing me?" Jacopo tapped his cigar against the ashtray on his desk, then leaned back in his chair. He had considered it before, but he always came to the same conclusion. Every other maid could quit and it wouldn't slow down work as much as losing you. "Oh my, you think quite highly of me. I know a capable worker when I see one, and you're more than capable. Hell, sometimes I wonder if you've been doing this job for hundreds of years." My," she said, her smile widening. "You jest. If I had been a maid for hundreds of years, that would make me a ghost." "Well, aren't you?" he almost said. 5 or 6 years ago, he might have been able to chalk it up to good makeup, but 13 years wasn't something you could just hide like that. Jacopo didn't like talk of ghosts or the supernatural or any of that nonsense, but had reached a point he simply couldn't think of any natural explanation. "Why don't we have a little chat? I'd like to get to know a little about you." Her eyes went wide at his proposition. It had been a while since he had seen her make a face other than a pristine smile, but even her surprise seemed super artificial. With her, only the most restrained of emotions came across as genuine. "Is it going to rain tomorrow, master? You have never shown an interest in me before. Indeed, you might want to set your overcoat out." Now what was it you wished to know?" "What are you?" he asked, not dancing around the question. The head maid gave a little giggle in response. "I am but a mere maid, master." "Yeah, that's about what I figured you'd say. Next, who was your previous master?" "He was a very precarious man, drifting between man and beast." "What the hell is that supposed to mean? Doesn't sound like a very good master to me. Did he even pay you?" "No, sir. The house was in shambles at the time." He let out another long stream of smoke. What on earth was she speaking of? When he had bought the property, it was a little outdated but otherwise in good shape. If he took her at her word, that would have to have been at least 30 years ago. He wanted to press her further, but he knew she would just laugh and brush the question aside. So he took another puff of his cigar and asked, "And who was before that?" "The father of 2 adorable little children. He was rarely at the house, though, so his wife's son and daughter served as my masters. They were a noble family, and they treated me quite well." I didn't know nobility had lived here." "My, you believe me, master?" "Oh, so you realize it sounds ridiculous, do you?" "I understand that it may seem somewhat unbelievable to you, yes." "Well, I'm not completely taking at your word, that's for sure. This is just a casual conversation after all, and I know we're all prone to some embellishment. So, who was before that?" "The sibling's grandfather. He was the man who taught me how to be a maid. He loved roses, and I would often go out and admire the flowers with him." Jacopo twitched at the word rose. a reminder of a great mistake he'd made years ago. He stuck a glance at the window, closed his eyes, and whispered, "I see." "All right," he continued. "Who was before that?" Before him was... Her gaze drifted upward, and then a rift formed in her persona, barely perceptible, but it didn't slip past Jacopo's notice. She still wore the eerily flawless smile, but hair-thin cracks had appeared in her jade eyes, allowing a carefully hidden murkiness to seep to the surface. For a split second, she seemed to be wearied to her core, looking out toward a faraway land she could never reach. And then it was gone just as quickly. Before him was my dearly beloved, whose return I am still awaiting. For that reason, I hesitate to call them my master. I am terribly excited for their eventual return, though. "Sounds complicated," he said. "I won't pry any further." She gave a wide smile. It was best to just leave it at that, he thought. They weren't friends. She was a maid, and he was her master. "Next question. And I don't know how I never asked you this before," Jacopo said, letting it hang in the air for a second. "What is your name?" Saying it out loud only emphasized how ridiculous a question it was. He had this woman in his hire for 13 years without so much as knowing her name. With every other maid, he knew their name, age, family history, and more before they even signed the contract. But her? He never had a contract for her in the first place, which was unthinkable for a man who didn't even allow himself to make the smallest of mistakes. He had no idea how he could have let this happen. The only explanation he could think of was some unnatural power diverting his attention from it. My. You can simply call me the head maid as you have all these years. I'm the master of the house, and I'm telling you to tell me your name," he said in his unflinching business voice. To which she gave him the same smile as ever. And then, when she offered him the name she believed to be her own, the air in the room seemed to crack. "My name is Morgana, master." Jacopo's eyes went wide. While he wasn't prone to shouting now as he had been in his emotionally troubled 20s, that was enough to push him over the edge. "No, it's not," he yelled, unsure why he was so certain. There was another crack in the air between them. He lurched out of his chair, the force sending it toppling to the floor. She, meanwhile, looked only mildly surprised. "No, that name does not belong to you." "Oh my, then to whom does it belong?" She giggled. Every second he spent in the presence of that stony smile felt like a knife to the heart. By any reasonable measure, she was in the right. He had no place to deny someone else their name. But deep down, he just couldn't accept that name as belonging to the head maid. "Master, your hand." He looked down to see his fist clenched around the still lit cigar. The faint smell of burnt flesh rose up from it, though he didn't even feel the heat. Jacopo threw the crushed cigar to the ground. He had no idea why hearing a single name had sent him into such a frenzy, and not having an explanation only agitated him further. "I think that's quite enough conversation for one day. Please, just call me the head maid as you always have." "Now, do excuse me, master," she said, and Jacopo could only watch in silence as she drifted out of his office. Jacopo's wife's bedroom was on the second floor next to his own, specifically the room she had used in the early days of their marriage. In response to the information shared with him by a good friend, which he trusted blindly, he had moved her to the first floor, and then, still unable to trust her, he had relocated her to an entirely separate building on the property. Her room on the second floor had remained untouched since her disappearance. Knowing she was sensitive to sunlight, he had a heavy light blocking curtains installed in the windows. And then, so the room didn't feel too gloomy, he had it furnished with white fabrics and light wooden furniture. And it was all still there. He included the room in the maid's daily cleaning duties, but many of them considered it a waste of time, so occasionally it would be neglected. In the past, he would have yelled at them for that, but now he just gave them stern reminders to do all their assigned work. Which worked, though he could tell they weren't pleased. No one actually believed his wife would ever come back. After losing everything at the age of 26, he had set out in search of his missing wife, both with his own 2 feet and by hiring private investigators to look for her all across the globe. But even after so many years, he had nothing to show for it. Jacopo was beginning to think himself that she would never be back. But he wouldn't give up, for any reason. She had waited steadfastly for him, even after being broken mentally and spiritually, so he had an obligation to do the same. It wasn't worth much, but it was the least he could do for her, being the one responsible for hurting her so. He wished to have just one last chance to see her again and atone for all the damage she had done. That was the only thing keeping him alive, now that he had nothing else. He stood quietly in his wife's bedroom. On the desk sat her phenakistoscope, yellowed over the years. It's always that word, man. Every time. It always gets me. He could still see her calling it her Fenakis wheel with a gentle smile on her face, the same smile he had stolen from her and crushed under his feet. It's a pleasure to meet you. He could hear her voice as clear as day they had gotten married. Hers was a soft, almost musical voice, the sound of which he would never forget. It's a pleasure to meet you. My name is Michelle. They first met on the day of their wedding in the waiting room. She was wearing a veil at the time, so it wasn't until they made their vows that he saw the brilliantly affectionate smile on her face. A perfect match for her name, he thought, which came from the Archangel Michael. There was no one for whom an angel's name was more appropriate. But now the pieces had come loose with the head maid's earth-shaking proclamation, and they were coming together to form a different picture altogether. On the day Jacopo met his wife, somewhere deep down he felt as though he had known her some time long, long ago, that he had been searching for her that entire time and had wanted nothing more than to bask in the light of that smile once more, and he would do anything to make sure she never lost it again. He saw a vision of a forlorn graveyard he had never seen before. A young girl crouched before a makeshift headstone, turning back to look at him. Her smile, the same as the woman he had married. Her eyes went wide, and he thought he was crying, but they were perfectly dry. He had long since lost the ability to weep. Was Michelle really your name? Jacopo's soul was bound by two sets of chains, weighed down by two great transgressions. He could feel them both distinctly. He understood how terrible the things he had done were, and that he deserved no redemption. A few days later, Jacopo was returning from an on-site inspection and decided to pass through the garden on the way. A woman with long black hair crouched before a small flower bed, practically blending into the night. Hearing her master's footsteps, she stood up, brushed the dirt off her skirt, and gave him an ever-flawless smile. "Good evening, master. What brings you to the garden this evening?" "I was looking for you," he said. "Oh my. You have not been yourself lately, sir. Is it love? Because I am afraid my heart already belongs to someone else." "That's not funny. My heart's already taken too, and not by you." She giggled impishly. "You are quite right, master. You would never tell the object of your affection I was looking for you." "Hey, that's your boss you're talking to." Jacopo sighed, glancing over at the flower bed. The whole area had once been a magnificent rose garden, but he had ordered it destroyed 9 years ago. Enough time had passed that he was able to grow out of his irrational hatred of flowers, though. And so it was the head maid's efforts that had brought it back to life, though on a smaller scale for the time being. "I apologize for what I did to the rose garden," he said, which elicited a bewildered stare from her. His gaze still averted, he continued. "You were fond of the roses too, weren't you? You mentioned coming out to look at the flowers with one of your previous masters, the nobleman, wasn't it? And now that I think about it, you were the one who looked after the garden the most as well." The head maid let his words hang in the air for a few moments, then gave him a quizzical look. What has gotten into him, she thought. But giving it a bit more consideration, she understood. He had had plenty of time to reflect on his mistakes, so perhaps an apology was not so surprising. She had grown numb to the passage of time that she'd forgotten Jacopo was just a young businessman still getting his feet wet when they'd first met. So green that he had seen no trouble in hiring a mysterious maid who refused to talk about herself, eventually assigning her to the position of head maid. Power, influence, business relationships, restless nights, constant betrayal. The pressures of the life he had chosen had corrupted him. And then, in the wake of a great tragedy, he had managed to rid himself of some of that corruption. But only after he had lost the two people to whom that change would matter most. "You need not apologize to me for anything," she said. "As a matter of fact, I bear some fault myself for failing to see the truth. I could have stopped you, master. I could have prevented the destruction of the rose garden, too." "You're just a maid," he said. "You were in no position to see anything I couldn't. I should have caught on to Maria's scheming sooner. And I should have trusted my wife. The truth I failed to see was not theirs. It was yours, master." "Mine?" "Yes. I failed to see the kindness and love in your heart." Jacopo glared at the smiling head maid like she had just told an offensive joke. "If that were true, I wouldn't have been so obsessed with money and personal gain. I wouldn't have killed my closest friend, and I wouldn't have abused my wife. Were your monetary desires truly as selfish as you claim?" He clenched his teeth, turning away from her clear jade eyes. He felt like she was looking straight through him. "You wanted the money," she said, "for your homeland, your family, your friend, your beloved. Am I mistaken?" "Yes, you are," he spat. While it was true that he had wanted money for all those things, they were not his only motivators. He'd also wanted it for power, to put himself on top of the world, safe from anyone who would betray him. But eventually, money and power changed from the means into the goal itself, sending him far off the path. Had he simply kept his eye on his true objective rather than obsessing endlessly over how to protect himself, he could have done more for both Maria and his wife. The head maid gave him a somewhat melancholy smile. If you so insist, master, then yes, I am mistaken. Nonetheless, it is all in the past now, and neither of us can take back the choices we made then. Precisely. He could say it was all supposed to be for his wife or Maria, but what would that accomplish? Nothing. Allegedly, noble intentions didn't excuse the kind of pain he had caused. He let out a short sigh, casting all those thoughts aside. I was looking for you because I need you for something. Yes, what can I help you with? She asked. He turned his gaze toward the mansion, staring up a tall, long-abandoned tower. It seemed almost radiant in the light of the full moon. Come with me. When Jacopo purchased the mansion, it had already gone through repairs to bring it up to the habitable condition. There was just one area that remained conspicuously in disrepair. Initially, he was planning to have the strange, decrepit tower demolished. There was no point in having it repaired only to sit unused, so he wanted to replace it with something actually useful, like a storeroom. But for some reason, which he still didn't understand, he could never bring himself to destroy the tower. The entrance of the tower was at the back of what he called the second great hall, a mostly unused hall near the back of the property. There were rumors among the maids about strange sounds and ghosts and blood dripping from the ceiling going as far back as when Maria was still alive. Back then, he recalled telling her it was all nonsense and that he had no interest in you women's little ghost stories. But the truth was, something did seem off about the hall. Not in a frightening or unsettling way, though. Being there, he felt smothered with guilt and shackled with sorrow. So he avoided going to the second great hall as much as possible. He hadn't even had lights installed in the hall, so stepping through the door felt like entering an entirely isolated realm of darkness. Jacopo and the head maid each carried oil lamps to light their way to the hall. At the far end stood a door not opened in countless years. Just an ordinary wooden door with a simple lock and a heavy metal one with a complicated 3-key lock. As he unlocked the door with his master key, the head maid whispered, "Why did you bring me here?" She considered following it up with, "Were you too scared to come on your own?" But even she couldn't bring herself to make light of things in the tower's presence. "I started paying more attention to you recently, after the last maid quit. And I noticed when you're not focused on something, you're looking towards one of two places. The former rose garden, or this tower. So I thought it would be best to bring you with me when I came to see the tower." "I see." The inside of the tower was black as the abyss, even darker than the hall leading to it. You know, the one thing I really like about Jacopo is that he's very observant. Like, he knows how people react and what they do, because that's technically his job. He's always been that person. He can technically see through people as well as people can see through him when he's focused. The light from their 2 oil lamps revealed a long, long spiral staircase leading up, and something stirred in the long frozen heart of the head maid at the sight of that staircase. Jacopo set a foot on the first stair, pressing down on it hard in several places. It let out low creaks under his weight, but didn't seem too in danger of breaking. That said, it was still an abandoned tower at night, and nobody knew they were here. This was a terrible idea that could go wrong at any time, and he knew it. Watching him slowly climb the stairs, the head maid's chest grew tight. For an instant, she was seeing him, but someone else. She wasn't seeing him, but someone else. They were holding her by the hand, running up and up and up, and... "Why did you want to see the tower?" she said, trying to bring herself back to the present. "Hell if I know." She tilted her head. He almost never acted without a clear reason. "All I do know is, I got the strangest feeling I would find something about myself here." "I see," she said, putting on a smile. "I too have a strange feeling that I will find something of myself here." Climbing the decaying staircase was a long and arduous process. Every so often they passed a window carved out of the stone wall. The light from the moon illuminated the path before them, guiding sinner and prisoner ever upward. After more revolutions than the head maid was able to count, the end was finally in sight. But there was one final obstacle before they could reach the door at the top. The next section of the staircase had collapsed. "Shall we head back?" the head maid asked. If they were to attempt to proceed, one of them would undoubtedly slip and take a fall straight down to hell. Surely Jacopo would realize there was no way forward and give up. But she was wrong. Leaning against the stone wall for support, he placed his right foot on what little remained of the next stair, and then he carefully guided his left foot to the next. Several slow, meticulous steps later, a chunk of stone gave out under his weight, tumbling downward into the abyss. But even that was not enough to stop his determined procession. She watched him in silence. She was not afraid that he might fall, however, because if that were to happen, then that simply meant he was fated to die here. It was an insignificant detail to her. As long as she was able to wait for her beloved to return, nothing else mattered. But he made it across the collapsed region unharmed. It seemed the mansion was not ready to be rid of him just yet. He turned around, shining his oil lamp over the gap. "You're free to wait there." No, she said. "I will accompany you." She then gracefully lifted her skirt off the ground and followed the same crumbling path across the chasm he had. When she finally made it across, he gave her a smug smirk. "Damn, and here I thought you were going to float across like a ghost. I guess you really are alive." To which she responded with a little smile. They resumed their climb, soon reaching the top level of the tower. Beyond the door, half rotten away, sat a chamber with a single window high upon the wall, though it shone a pillar of moonlight. Through it shone a pillar of moonlight. The two of them entered the chamber, proceeding to the center of the room. The air inside was far colder than the autumn night they had left behind. It chilled them both to their bones, to their souls. Jacopo stood in place, gazing up at the window for some time. Then he walked up to the stone wall, dropping to his knees in front of what appeared to be nothing at all. He traced the irregular surface with his fingers, his hands slowly forming into fists and dropping lifelessly to the hard floor. She could hardly see a trace of the powerful, wealthy businessman he was in that slouched form. He seemed so much smaller and on the verge of withering away. "Did you find that something about yourself here?" she asked, her voice carrying well in the cold, empty chamber. "Yeah," he said, his voice shaking. There was far more contained in that single syllable than she could ever hope to discern. For a moment she thought he was crying. But from the glimpse she caught on his face, his eyes were dry, though he looked pale as a ghost. She stepped toward him, gently placing her hand on his back. And then she spoke, breaking her personal vow to remain an observer. "If you wish to end your life here, I can offer you my hand." The man spun around to face her. There was neither anger nor surprise in his eyes, though. "Why would you say that?" "I do not know," she said. "Seeing you there on your knees, the words simply came out. I felt as though that was what you wanted." She lowered herself to her knees as well, so their eyes were at the same level. He flinched, but did not avert his gaze from hers. "You're right," he muttered, barely audible. "There was a time when I did want that. A long, long time ago. But still, I descended those stairs. I couldn't let myself just toss aside what I had sacrificed everything to attain, even knowing there was only suffering to be found at the bottom. That's exactly why. I had to own it, just like I have to own my mistakes now." "I see. Then I shall observe and see where this path takes you." Ah, what a wretched man, she thought, smiling. She was an experienced enough maid to know to keep that thought to herself, though. And she herself was also a wretched woman, who had wanted to die alongside her love at the top of this very tower. But in her broken mind, those memories had been transformed into a fairy tale. The full moon had begun its descent by the time they left the cold chamber. At the collapsed section of stairs, Jacopo crossed first as he had going up. The head maid then made to follow after him, but was instead greeted to his hand extended across the gap. She tilted her head. Obviously, he was offering her assistance in crossing, but she had made it over with no difficulty the first time, so she couldn't understand why. Not to mention the master of the house had no obligation to help a lowly maid. But bathed in the glow of the moon, her hand stretched out to take his. Before she realized what had happened, they had both lost those they cared about most, and when their fingers touched, he saw a bright-spirited young woman with an infectious smile, and she saw a kind-hearted and sometimes sarcastic young man, Giselle and the slave vestiges of their long-forgotten selves bursting forth for the tiniest and most insignificant of moments. "Michelle, to tell you the truth, I want nothing more than to descend those stairs with you, hand in hand. Morgana, to tell you the truth, I want nothing more than to go back to those days when I could still take your hand." By the time the head maid had made it across the collapsed stairs, the shadows of their old selves had disappeared without a trace. Only the maid who always wore a smile and the forlorn businessman remained there in the tower. A faint connection had formed between them, though. A shared isolation and emptiness. And empathy, as similarly damaged souls. But that, too, would fade in time. Their connection as fleeting as an autumn night. With him leading the way, and her following behind. They descended the spiral staircase together. "And what about you?" he asked. "Were you able to find that something about yourself here?" "Yes," she said. "I believe I did. But I fear it will slip through my fingers again before long." "You never struck me as the forgetful type." "I have been for some time. I have no room for new memories anymore." "Well, that's probably for the best," he said. "It would be best if you forgot what you found here as well." "Not a chance." My," she said, "you are quite the intractable one. I could say the same about you." Say, Master, what is it? I want to tell you something before I forget the things I felt tonight. Yeah? I was not terribly fond of you when we first met. Ha, that sounds about right. But that's not true any longer. Is that so? It is. The truth is, I thought you were creepy as hell at first. Didn't even want to look at you. That sounds about right. But that's not the case anymore. Is that so? Yeah, it is. Alright, fellas, I'm going to end the video here for today. Thank you all for watching. I believe this one has been the longest story, but it also was very insightful because we got to delve even deeper into the third door's story, like what happened after. And we learned like the very bitter fate that both Jacopo and Giselle had to suffer through. And it's sad because when they regained a moment of themselves, it's just ever fleeting. And which again reinforces the fact that I'm so glad the main story ended the way it did. Um, I'm sure that in reincarnation we're gonna get more story about the characters again, but from a new perspective. And I hope that they get the better endings they deserve in that one at least. But until then, guys, thank you all for watching, and as usual, until the next one.